Hey, it's Two Geek Soup, and we're here again with another new friend, author KB Hoyle, and your first, you told me your first initial stands for Karen, and I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Condolences are welcome.
So, I know Karen, this is another friend from Geeky Christian Twitter. Mm-hmm. The last episode, I don't know if you caught it yet, I talked to Liz Garn about D&D, and that was delightful. Yep. And so here we have another Geeky Christian Twitter friend, and so we're going to do the thing that we do with all of our new friends. And before we get into our conversation about Black Widow, is what we're talking about today, I just want to get a sense from you of, like, what is your relationship to geek culture and what first got you into that, and so, kind of like what sort of a geek are you?
Okay, so this is kind of a complicated question, I guess, because I'm not like a deep geek. You know, like I've never played Dungeons and Dragons, and I've never read a bunch of comic books. I wasn't one of those like closeted geeks throughout. I was born in '83, so I was born. I was kind of brought up. I consider myself a '90s kid because obviously being born in '83,
yes. I turned 40 this year as well.
Right.
So we're right
happy
there.
Birthday
also,
to us, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, hooray.
This was the year, and you didn't. We were familiar with '80s. Culture, but really our beating heart is the 90s, right?
Yeah, like Stranger Things is great,
right,
but it's not really like, where our soul is.
Exactly. Like my soul is more with the grunge culture of the 90s. And
Captain Planet and Disney Afternoon.
I wasn't allowed to watch Captain Planet.
I'm surprised that I was allowed to watch Captain Planet. If my parents had been paying more attention to Captain Planet, they probably would have discouraged me from it because it's definitely way more woke than they would have appreciated.
Right. I mean, all the things we kind of grow up and untangle from our childhood and just kind of.
I wasn't allowed to watch Smurfs.
Oh, see, I was. So that but we didn't have cable. We didn't have I'm trying to remember, like I remember watching kind of circling back to answering the question. I was the sort of geek where I grew up on Star Wars and like James Bond because back
when Star Wars was special and it wasn't
Star Wars was special, exactly.
6 months.
Exactly. And my first favorite movie was the Return of the Jedi. Because that was the first one I ever saw. And
exactly.
I saw it multiple times.
We're basically the same person right now,
okay.
Karen.
So you appreciate my appreciation for the film, though, because people always get really scandalized when I say, well, of the original trilogy, that I always consider that to be the best one. But that was my introduction to Star Wars because that I saw that one, I can't even tell you how many times, and in black and white because we had a little black and white TV.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I saw that. I can't even tell you how many times I saw Return of the Jedi on that little black and white TV. It's not I never got to go see them in the theater. I never saw the original Star Wars. I saw Return of the Jedi, and then eventually, because we only saw them when they came to network television, right? And then eventually I saw The Empire Strikes Back, and I just was like, what is this? Like, the movie ends on Han being frozen in kryptonite.
Right.
Like, what is happening here? This really stinks.
Yeah.
And then eventually, and I have a hard time remembering if I saw the original film before George Lucas released the special editions when they went to the theater.
Now, did you go to see the special editions at the theater?
So many times. I cannot even tell you how many times I went and saw them and was wearing my hair in like Princess Leia braids.
That's so cute.
I really do want to say I'm pretty sure I did see the original Star Wars A New Hope before the theater because I remember at one point seeing it and thinking, this is not great.
It's not better, yeah.
Because when you're raised on Jedi, and then I loved Empire, but I just was confused by it because I saw them out of order.
For me, like, I have enough, like, I don't want to, like, I'm not, like, a cinephile, but, like, I'm enough of a movie person to, like, have the intellectual understanding that Empire is the best of the original series movies.
I can appreciate that on an intellectual level. I get it.
Right, but Jedi is my favorite.
Has my heart. Has my heart.
Yeah.
And this is all very important to the discussion, so we need to go through this. A New Hope did not make sense to me. Like, it just was too dorky and, like, stilted to me for a long, long time. And but I was such a Star Wars geek, and it was not accepted to be a girl and to be a Star Wars geek when it was the 80s and 90s.
Did you read the Star Wars novels?
I did. Lots and lots of them. But, like, very, like, on the down low, you know, because it just was not cool. And I struggled, and, you know, kind of fast forwarding into, like, adolescence. Karen, I struggled to be I had no friends. I kind of struggled for a long time.
Karen, we're gonna be such better friends after this conversation. I just know it.
You're like, oh, she makes so much more sense now. Yes. I struggled. But here's the other thing. Like, I would go to school. I remember being like 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I would go to school. I would come home. I would put on the Batman Superman hour. Do you remember the Batman Superman hour?
Oh, yeah. Well, kind of. My high school, I grew up in Estonia as a missionary kid in high school. So I didn't have the Batman Superman hour, but I definitely did have, like, Batman the Animated Series.
Sure.
So I just didn't get, like, the Batman Robin, like, the adventures, like, what came later when Catwoman had a blue face for some reason.
I don't remember.
Her face was weirdly blue when she was in costume in that later version of the show, and it doesn't matter.
I don't know. It doesn't, like, for me, it was like I was kind of raised on Star Wars, and Indiana Jones, and James Bond, because that's what was on TV, and my dad would watch those, and he let me watch those when I was really, honestly, too young to really watch some of these things, but I would get really worked up. I really wanted to be one of these characters in these great, like, serial, you know, films, but I would get really, really worked up. I remember it distinctly when I was very young, being really, like, anxious about what was happening. And my dad looked at me and he said, "Don't worry." And I don't remember if it was James Bond or Indiana Jones. It was one of those two. And he said, you know, we'll just say Indiana Jones. He says, "Indiana Jones never dies." And that just kind of, like, it stuck in my brain, and it just kind of soothed me. It was this idea that, you know, no matter how tense the, you know, action is, no matter what happens, the hero never dies. And that kind of stuck in my, like, young brain, the whole, like, this is the sort of story that is told. And on the reading end of things, I was raised, of course, on the Chronicles of Narnia, George MacDonald, The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and was looking around for more books to read like that, and really not finding more books to read like that. So I would just reread and reread and reread. So, you know, this is the sort of
the closest you could have really is Frank Peretti, right?
And then you went into Frank Peretti, because as a Christian, you know, there was very little. Thankfully, my parents were not like, everything is forbidden. But as we got into the 90s, and there was I don't know when the Satanic Panic hit, but, like, it hit.
It was like late 80s, early 90s. Yeah.
And my parents
Liz and I talked all about that last time.
Yeah. I saw you had her on, but I listened to, like, the beginning of the podcast, but I didn't listen further than that yet. But
that's okay, because if you're not into D&D,
I'm not
isn't as much there for you. So
I'm, like,
that's cool.
Kind of, and I know enough about it just from living through it that, like, we had friends whose families were like I had friends who could not watch anything except for, like, 2 shows, like Rescue 911 and what the Angel show. What was the Angel show?
Oh, Touched by an Angel.
Touched by an Angel. Like, those were the two shows, and that was it. Thankfully, my family was not like that. But, like, they kind of, like, my parents kind of walked a more, like, conscientious, like, okay, well, that's nonsense. However, we are going to, you know, be a little bit, you know, aware of what's out there.
So, like, a little bit restrictive, but not, like, mega arbitrary.
Right.
Yeah, that's
like,
good.
Yeah, and I would say it was good. I mean, like, I didn't grow up, like, totally scarred or anything like that. However, again, we didn't have cable, which I'm not, like... I wasn't exposed to things that I probably shouldn't have been exposed to at a very young age, which is good. So a lot of that kind of skipped, but I don't think my parents would have let me play Dungeons and Dragons, though. Like, that's kind of where they, like, okay, we kind of, you know.
Sure.
This is the line.
Okay, so basically Star Wars was your in.
Star Wars was my in, and like, but then there's also, like, the Indiana Jones stuff and, like, the... just kind of my general love of cinema, and then kind of following that through into my teen years. And I was not a big, like, I do think it's worth mentioning that I loved Batman and Superman, like the comic, the cartoon show. I continue to watch that. I never told a soul. Like, I did not tell my friends because I did not have friends. And then once I had friends, I was like, well, I'm not telling them about this because they will not think this is cool at all. So and funny. I will lose my friends. But that really, I loved the Michael Keaton Batman films. I maintain that Batman Forever is a good movie.
Oh, maybe we're not going to be good friends.
No, it's good. I mean, Jim Carrey...
Batman Forever... Okay, no, Batman Forever is still okay.
It's
Batman
okay.
and Robin
Batman and Robin is terrible, and that, I almost lost faith in the entire franchise. But... Dude,
everybody lost faith in comic book movies as a project, like, as a genre of movie.
It almost killed it dead. But, like, Jim Carrey as the Riddler? Are you kidding me? He ate up the screen.
You're right. Batman Forever is not horrendous.
I watched that movie so many times I could probably quote it. But no, I loved it, and I loved all of it. And then Batman and Robin happened, and everyone was like, "Oh, are you kidding me?" But then when X-Men came out, the first X-Men movie, it was like, "Oh, hope is restored." But I didn't know the like subject matter. I'd never read I'd never read the comic books.
Okay.
So that's
and you never watched the X-Men cartoon either?
No, I'd never read the X-Men. I didn't know anything about Marvel, and so my you know, a lot of people would say, "Oh, you're not a true fan," because I had never read comic books. You know, I'd never read. So you know, if you've like, I loved Batman. I loved Superman. I missed all of Smallville because I was busy having my children. I was married young. I was busy having my children, so I had to watch Smallville after the fact. But we did not miss the Christian Bale Batman films because I would not miss anything Batman ever. But
dude, it's like, you are absolutely valid as a fan if Batman the Animated Series is your Batman, because like that is an excellent Batman. Like, that's a better Batman than than a lot of what else has gone on.
It is classic
on the screen.
My kids are watching it right now. They discovered it organically, and they are busy watching it right now downstairs.
Like, as we speak?
Speak. And they're like, so we discovered this show, and it's like a Batman animated show, and they all love it, except for the 8-year-old who's a little bit scared because of that one episode where the guy dissolves into Clayface becomes Clayface. And I was like, oh, that's a scary one. He couldn't sleep last night, and that was tragic. But I was like, don't worry, that's the scariest one. I had nightmares about that one too.
Is that the scariest one? Like,
we're gonna say it's the scariest one.
It's a scary one for sure.
I told the 8-year-old it was the scariest one. Okay, so we're just going with that.
We're going with until the next scariest one comes along.
I remember that episode.
Like when Catwoman gets turned into like a cat mutant person, that one's kind of scary because there's other like animal people.
It's
in that episode that
I think the Clayface episode is pretty scary.
Yeah.
But when I just want to fast forward really quick. Mm-hmm. I dominate podcasts, by the way. Sorry.
It's fine. No, it's great. I love it.
But I just want to fast forward really quick because when Iron Man came out in 2008, I had no clue who that character was.
Most people didn't. Iron Man was like a solidly B-list Marvel character at that time still.
Right. But I was like, my husband, and okay, 2008, we had a 1-year-old. Our oldest was 1 year old. We were just kind of scraping by. We were very, very poor. We barely got out of the house. It was just kind of, it was hard to have any sort of recreation at all. Yeah. And my husband went to see it with some other guys. And he came home and he looked at me and said, "You need to go see that film." So I went to the movie theater by myself the next day.
You guys didn't even have enough money for you go to
We
to go
frequently
together?
split up because you know what? Babysitters are dollar bills, yo. So we split up and I went to the movie theater by this is how impactful that movie was for me. I still remember exactly where I was sitting. Now, as a writer, I have one of those mind palaces like Sherlock, okay? So that's the way my brain works and that's the way my memory works. I can take you back. I could take you back. We could telescopically go back to that day. I remember exactly where I was sitting, what the row looked like, what the people around me looked like. I remember that day, and I remember sitting and watching that movie and being like, I don't know, it's really dorky to kind of say it this way, but just kind of being like, my life will never be the same. It was like a religious experience sitting in that movie theater and watching that movie and thinking, I have never seen anything like this in my entire life. I wanted to stand up and cheer at the end of that movie. It was hard not to. And that it really was. I mean, in many ways, my life has never been the same since the first Iron Man movie. It kicked off a career of writing about pop culture. It helped me to understand storytelling in a new way. It helped me understand the whole kind of pop culture zeitgeist and why I have always loved and enjoyed pop culture and comic book storytelling and everything. It was just a really kind of new experience, and I've had a few experiences like that. The other experience that I had like that was, so this is why I told the whole Star Wars kind of thing. My favorite Star Wars film is actually Rogue One. And that was... It's
a great Star Wars movie. Rogue One is easily the best war movie of Star Wars.
And that is, and for me, the reason why it was so impactful for me is because I had never really understood A New Hope as a Star Wars film. And and I'm a storyteller. You know, I'm an author. I write these long series. I need to see the narrative arc. And Rogue One was always, or A New Hope was always just kind of like, this is a weird kind of, it's just dangling out here in the middle of nowhere. And I don't mind the prequel trilogy. I will boldly say that. I think it's kind of, you know, it was dorky, but I don't mind it from a narrative perspective. It could be filmed a lot better. The acting is terrible, but I don't mind it. Rogue One kind of came in and stepped in there, and it connected the two, and it also made Darth Vader scary, like really scary for the first time. And it just, for someone who had grown up kind of like, Star Wars was just like milk for me, you know, as a young nerd, as a young geek. And I don't know, I remember sitting in the movie theater and watching that movie, and I was so emotional, like, especially the last 10 minutes. But I was so emotional about it, and we got out into the car, and my husband looked at me and goes, "Are you okay?" And I just, like, burst into, like, heaving, racking sobs, and was like, it was so beautiful, and like I was inconsolable and cried all the way home. And it's now our family tradition. We watch it every year at Advent because it's really an Advent film. I wrote an article about that.
Oh, cool. Okay, I need to go back and read that.
We typically watch it on
good.
Christmas Eve, but it's an Advent film.
That's fun.
So that's what sort of geek I am.
Excellent. I love it that we spent 20 minutes talking about that. That's fantastic.
That's not a short question,
No, but I'm not even joking at all. Like, that was fantastic. I love it. All right, so let's then smoothly transition, because this is a great segue now into talking about Black Widow.
Sure.
And Black Widow has been around as a character for a long time.
Yeah.
Her first appearance was actually in an Iron Man comic book.
Okay.
As somebody who was like spying on Tony Stark.
Yeah. Sure, I'll trust you on that.
So she was. This is something that I do a little bit every time we talk about a comic book movie. Is I like to bring in the history of the character a little bit. But, like, there's too much to go into with Black Widow because she has been around forever. And so when I saw in the trailer that they were bringing in the Yelena Belova character, I was a little bit disappointed that it looked like she was going to be another protagonist, because in the comics, Yelena Belova was a younger agent of the Red Room,
okay,
the Soviet sort of spy organization that trained Natasha, and her like obsession was to like be the like to supplant Natasha and like overcome her and like be the better exemplar of everything that the Red Room does, because of course then she sees Natasha as a traitor as well, and so that's another part of the obsession. I kind of thought it would be cool to see that sort of like like super spy versus super spy kind of thing in the context of the Marvel universe. And so with the trailer, seeing that it looked like she was going to be more of another protagonist, I was a little bit disappointed at first about that. But Black Widow for me as the movie, like, it's a good movie. Like, it's a perfectly fine like spy action movie. But I just kind of don't care about it a lot, because the way that it fits into the timeline and the time at which it was released just sort of like completely evacuates any stakes from this movie. Like Natasha's not gonna die, and like these other characters that you're introducing, like I don't have a super reason to care about, and like it definitely suffers from Marvel villainitis, which is where like the bad guy is somebody that you super don't care about and you can barely remember like who they are 10 minutes after the movie ended. And it's just it's definitely in that like phase 4 slump for the MCU. And as with Captain Marvel, I recognize that part of my ambivalence toward Black Widow could be that like that this movie is not for me as a dude as much as some of the other ones are. Like what do you think?
Well, I think that Black Widow it was released at the wrong time. Marvel has had I mean, everybody kind of understands. I think that Marvel has had a problem with their female superheroes. I mean, they've had a problem with representation. They've had a problem with...
Like, you mean in the movies?
Yeah, with being reluctant to allow women to spearhead their own projects.
Okay, sure, yeah.
You know, well, and also with just... I mean, how many films... I know I've written about it. I always had to go back and Google, how many films was it before we had a black superhero who spearheaded his own film? You know, there was...
Well, actually, like, Blade was the first Marvel movie.
Within the MCU.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
MCU,
I mean, you
Black Panther, yeah. So
you know, within the MCU, when they rebooted and they really got going on like these big projects, you know, and then when they had their when they introduced women to the MCU, you know, I was always kind of sitting and rolling my eyes at Black Widow, because you've got, as much as I love Natasha Romanoff, it's like her introduction in Iron Man 2 is like, oh, here she is, super sexy. Oh, here she is. She's in a lingerie spread. Let's blow that up on the screen. You know, and that's really difficult too. You know, not only does it make me as a woman feel like, oh, okay, this is what we're good for in the MCU, I guess, is eye candy. But it's also like, you know, me trying to show these films to my boys is like, okay, close your eyes. Okay, you can open them again. Close your eyes. You know, it's just the message that we're sending boys is that if you're going to be a female superhero, you have to be super duper sexy, you know,
right.
And there's a difference between being strong and being sexy. Yeah, as much as, you know, men can be sexy and, you know, men can be strong and men can also be sexy, but it's also like, you know, the men, it's not like Tony Stark was, you know, Tony gets to be covered in metal armor. Like, he's sassy and all of that, but his sexuality is not part and parcel of what makes him Iron Man. He's not there to be eye candy, but she was there to be eye candy. And what I love about her character is that as she progresses, you see the transformation of her from being this eye candy, and even just the way that they have her move in her fight sequences, which is, you know, I'm very, you know, kind of the seductress in these kind of moves where she's always swaying her hips, and they kind of transition, you know, and you know what I mean? Everybody who's seen the movies knows that. I mean, even the way they do her hair and her makeup and just all of the promotional material around the films too, as regarding like what she looks like, they transition away from that slowly, but it took a lot of time. It took a lot of time. And that has been really important. It's just, you know, Black Widow is a really important film, and I really liked it, but it just came too late. Like, her story, she deserved an origin story a lot sooner. It's just that they waited until she died. You know, like, we already know that she died, and then they're like, oh, okay, you're one of the highest grossing, you know, actresses in Hollywood. Now we have confidence that you spearhead your own film. And then, you know, it had the kind of double, which nobody can control, but the fact that the fact that it came out during the pandemic too, and all the movie theaters shut down as well, which nobody could control that, you know. But Black Widow would have been a much more successful film if they had released it prior to Endgame, somewhere in between.
Yeah, that would have made a ton more sense.
Yeah, somewhere in between. And you know, which movie would have had to have gone in order for that to happen? Well, I don't know. That's not necessarily, I'm not saying that it's a, you know, switch this one out for that one. It's not really a calculus that needs to be made. I'm just saying, I'm not saying that one of those films has to go. I'm just saying that somewhere in there, Black Widow should have been placed, and then the movie would have had higher stakes.
Yeah.
And it would have been more successful. I thought that there were some incredibly neat and like just kind of searching for the right words here. Like, there were some important things that were done in the film. I like that for once she's not a sex pot. I mean, that's just important characterization. You know,
it really and when I was rewatching it, I was struck by just how little sexiness there was about that entire movie.
Yeah.
Like yeah, their suits are kind of like they're form-fitting.
Just for practicality.
But that's because they're spies. Like yeah.
It's like wearing tight clothes to go and exercise in because you don't want your pants to get stuck in your bike gears when you're riding a bike, you know, or
right.
you know, whatever. But you know, there's a difference between wearing form-fitting clothes because it's practical and wearing form-fitting clothes because it's super duper sexy and you need to be a super duper sexy spy. So, or to, you know, be super sexy to be an Avenger or whatever. So, you know, I kind of think about that sort of characterization in every film that I watch that features a female sort of superhero or female action figure. Is the femme fatale stereotype is strong. That these are the tools that are in a woman's, you know, sort of tool belt, and if she doesn't use them, then she's not capable.
Let's contrast that. Like, this is going to be like a weird side tangent, but it's occurring to me right now, and I think it like flows from this conversation. Mm-hmm. Can we like briefly contrast that with like the Wonder Woman movie?
Okay, yeah.
Because like, do you know Marilette Sanchez?
No.
No, okay. She wrote a whole thing about Wonder Woman that was amazing, and I had her on to talk about Wonder Woman several years ago. But that's been a long time. But like, I think that's one of the really cool things about the Wonder Woman movie as well, is that like that is not part of her. That's not really part of her character or like what happens in that movie either. And like, yeah, there's sexual tension obviously between her and the Chris Pine character, but it's not like, that's not part of her like MO.
Right.
And
she's not.
Go ahead.
She's not using her feminine wiles to defeat the villain.
Right.
You know, that is really important, because how often do you really see a male superhero, you know, using what God blessed him with to
masculine wiles.
His masculine wiles. You know, because I guess he's just too weak otherwise, you know. and but the thing is, when it is done, here's the thing. When it is done the other way, you know, reverse it, it's played for jokes. Think about it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of funny, you know, that like think about like Thor on the subway when which movie is that, when he's on the subway and the subway kind of like goes over it kind of jerkily moves and the girl kind of falls into him and she's like, oh. And he kind of smiles at her. Which Thor movie is that? Or is that one of the Avenger movies? Because because he's so pretty, they do kind of make fun about, they do kind of play it for jokes sometimes. And that is funny. It is funny, but they play it for jokes, you know?
I feel like it must have been Ragnarok.
It might, no, because he's never on Earth in Ragnarok.
Oh, no, not Ragnarok. Yes, they are on Earth at the beginning of Ragnarok.
Oh, you're right, because they go to visit Doctor Strange.
Yes. Because he's been
But
falling
he's
for 30 minutes!
But he's not in costume because he was in costume in the scene that I'm thinking of.
That's
or like
weird.
think
I
about
cannot remember
all
what
of
that
the pirate angel jokes in
Yes. In Infinity War.
Infinity War. Hang on. What? The listeners won't understand this, but I have.
Oh, okay. You
Thor,
got a
Pirate
Funko
Angel.
Pop.
Funko
Yeah, that's
Pop.
fun. Ever since Endgame came out, I have been dying for an opportunity to cosplay as Fat Thor.
But you know what made that so great is because it kind of like reversed the whole, expectations on that.
Yes. Yeah, like there are so many like middle-aged dudes who have never felt more seen than when Thor stood up and he's got this giant beer gut and he's like, threatening a teenager online.
Yep. But he's still worthy.
Oh my gosh, like that. Yeah, that we had a whole conversation about that in the Infinity War or the Endgame episode too. So
I wrote an article about that. But I mean, like in real life, and here's the thing, like, I mean, just in the interest of representing real life and how real women feel and real men, as far as what is good and beautiful and true about how real people go through the real world. Like, real women, we don't go around like
flouncing around and
flouncing and like, I mean, we need to know, and this was the heart of, I loved Wonder Woman. I did love Wonder Woman, but I loved Captain Marvel. It was a very emotional experience for me in the movie theater. I cried real tears. That was, more than I really felt going to see Wonder Woman. Captain Marvel was a very emotional movie theater experience for me. I think I just connected with her more, kind of as growing up a tomboy and really struggling and striving to be like the boys, in so many ways, and being a gangly teenager. I didn't have curves. I didn't have sexual wiles. I didn't have any of that stuff. I just wanted to race with the boys, and I just wanted to be as good as them. And I just like Star Wars, and I like dinosaurs, and I liked cars, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot for a good while there. And I also wanted to be Indiana Jones, dang it, and Han Solo and stuff. And that's the thing, though. I wanted to be Han Solo because, I liked Princess Leia, but she had to go run in a dress.
Right.
And, seeing a superhero who was representative of, what I felt like was really impactful. And she didn't have to go and, be super sexy. She could just be herself, and she didn't have to, when she put what's his name in his place, that was really
Jan-Rog.
Jan-Rog. That was really, that meant a lot. It was like, we don't have to prove who we are. We don't have to be sexy.
Yeah.
We don't have to be what all the men want us to be. We don't have to maintain, I don't, even the little things, I don't wear makeup most days of the week. Who am I trying to impress here?
Right.
I'm raising 4 boys. Most of the time, I'm barely put together. It's like, this is important representation for a lot of women who are strong and who, we're not delusional. We're not superheroes. That's not what this representation is about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
there was some really yucky, discourse about Captain Marvel, and we talked. I had Michelle Reyes to talk about Captain Marvel, and to this day, we're gonna disagree about the merits of Captain Marvel. As a movie, I dislike it very much because because I did a whole podcast episode about that, and we that's another conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But like, again, that's another thing. Like, part of that again is probably a function of, like, it's not for me. Like, the story of, like, a woman, like, overcoming the system that is keeping her down is a valid story.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not one that, like, super resonates with me, and that's fine.
It's fine. It could be for you. My husband loves Captain Marvel. It's one of his favorite.
I dislike Captain Marvel because I think that character deserved a better story and better writing and a movie where she is actually funny and not just the movie telling you or thinking that she's really funny. And so, anyway.
That's another discussion.
That's a whole, like, that episode is the longest single episode of the podcast that I have so far, and we're not going to do it any sort of justice when we're actually here to talk about Black Widow. So let's circle back to that and talk a little bit about, like, the ways that story is being told in Black Widow, because for me, watching this movie again in preparation for this, like, tell me why I'm wrong, Karen.
Okay.
I felt like the story beat of, like, they're being controlled by a man was, like, really ham-fisted and I don't want to say contrived because it's comic book movies and everything.
Right, everything is contrived, yeah.
But it was ham-fisted. You know, it was not subtle in the slightest, and, like, it's kind of beating you over the head with it a little bit. Am I wrong?
Listen, it's not a movie that would get an A+ for plot. Let me just put it that way. I don't really think... I think the movie was there to showcase Natasha's character growth.
Okay.
And how she gets from point A to point B to kind of explain, because, she shows up in Infinity War, she's got this blonde hair, she's gone through this kind of transformation, now she was here, she was there. As far as the plot itself... is it ham-fisted? Is it, I think it's kind of meant to get you upset. Like, you've got all these women, they're being controlled by a man. Mm-hmm. Is that evil and awful? Yeah. Is it gross? Mm-hmm. Ew. Yeah.
Right.
Like, yes, it's contrived. Yes, it's gross. Yes, mm-hmm. It's ham-fisted. It's all of these things. This is not great cinema. And I'm saying that as someone who loves the MCU. This is not great cinema. But it's not, I think you're just kind of, like, here's what I feel about, like, these standalone films. And my husband mm-hmm. kind of says this to me, too, every time we, like, see a standalone film. Like, what are they going to come up with this time that is a reason for the whole team to not step in?
Right.
So it has to be small enough and contained enough that it's just a one-person job.
Right. Or like one person and their little support cast.
Right.
Yeah. And not a whole Avengers.
This is not an Avengers level
situation.
Threat.
Yeah.
So as far as, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think this requires a super duper, like, depth of analysis as far as the plot is concerned. Like, that, like, the hero is meant to be forgettable. I don't think this is going... I will come back on your podcast and we will talk about it if I'm wrong. I don't think that, like, the whole, like, her training, the Red Room, the villain, any of it, I don't think is meant to go beyond what it is. And I don't find... Okay. Like, I think it was just kind of meant to explain her backstory and, like... how she became who she is, how her sister became who she is. and that's all they wrote. I really do. Like,
yeah. So you know what's funny to me as I think back to like, okay, so did you watch Red Sparrow?
Nope. Mm-mm.
That's good because there's not a lot of redeeming value there. I did watch it recently because I knew I was going to be doing this episode, and like when the trailer for Red Sparrow came out, everyone was like all of film Twitter was like, why don't we have a Black Widow movie yet? This is basically a Black Widow movie. and like that entire movie is all like exclusively about like using feminine wiles.
Yeah.
Like that's like the entire, like that's the plot of the movie, is like this person like being shaped into an operative that is like trained to like seduce her way into whatever you know she needs to do.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's like, and she definitely, like, that character definitely like reclaims some agency in the end of it, and so on, but it is pretty exploitative.
Yeah.
And I actively discourage anyone from watching it because it's not worthwhile.
I kind of picked up on that from, you know, the trailers and whatnot, and just kind of thought, I'm gonna skip this one. I don't really think that this is worth my time.
No, it's not. But like it is, as a point of comparison, it is a little bit interesting that like that Black Widow steered so hard away from that aspect of Natasha's character, which had kind of been front and center when she was first introduced.
Yeah. Well,
and that's pretty great.
I mean, they played it off as character growth, and quite frankly, I mean, they can do that. That's within their rights to do, and it works to a degree. I think that it was also probably, I mean, based on things that I've read and whatnot too, though, that it was really driven by Scarlett Johansson as well, though, that she wanted to get away from that characterization of Black Widow and into a character that had more agency. And I could be wrong about that, but it's been a while since I've read about that, but
yeah. Well, and it makes sense because like that was definitely like at the height of all the Me Too stuff was going on right then as well, and so that probably played a lot into sort of the there was a big zeitgeist, you know, effect on the movie from that. I'm imagining.
Yeah.
Because now that I think about it, like the director of the Red Room definitely reads as like, you know, a sleazy movie producer a little bit.
Yeah, and that probably that probably impacted how that movie came across too, which probably means it didn't do very well. I don't know how well it did, but
yeah, I don't know, but anyway, I know I need to be respectful of your time, and so we're gonna have to start wrapping this up here. Gosh, I know there was something that I had in my mind to ask you about, but now I don't remember. So anyway, that's okay. But so what we like to do at the end of our show is wrap things up with what we call guaranteed good news. And you're doing like a bazillion things right now, and one of the things that you are doing is starting a business. And tell me a little bit about that.
So we launched. I'm the author of a lot of books, like 13 of them, and
By the way, Gateway Chronicles is on my Christmas list for my 13-year-old.
Oh, good. 13 is the perfect age to start reading it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I launched Owl's Nest Publishers. Owls like the bird. Owl's Nest Publishers with my childhood best friend back in January of 2022. And we are a publisher for adolescents. Specifically, we publish fiction and poetry for adolescents, and we really look to publish books that exemplify the classical virtues and that really reflect what teenagers are really like, because
mostly YA sucks at that. Right?
That's a problem we see in YA literature, is that it tends to be more marketed and targeted to adult women these days. So we kind of are distancing ourselves from the YA label. We say we publish for teens and middle grade readers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah. YA has become its own YA is kind of its own beast these days. It is. It's its own thing. If you kind of go and peruse the YA shelves in a bookstore these days, you might be surprised at kind of the sort of literature that's there. What we're publishing is supposed to be more reflective of what real teenagers actually act, think, speak, emote like. So we've got quite a few books on our list these days at owlsnestpublishers.com. You can check out what we're doing. Yeah.
That sounds super. And tell me about like the way that you're trying to reach out actually into your like community.
Right. So we well, obviously we're trying to reach all sorts of, the libraries and schools and whatnot, but we have a little tiny project going on right now, where my business partner, her neighborhood does not have a little free library. So we are looking to build a little free library, and if anybody is looking to is interested in donating to that project, we have a Buy Me a Coffee page, which is linked on our website, again, owlsnestpublishers.com. And you can, on the main page, you can go to our Buy Me a Coffee page, and our wish list item is to raise money to build a little free library in her front yard, in her neighborhood, which does not have a little free library. And this will be a little free library that we curate. So it will be...
Oh, that's super.
Yeah. So it's not like we're going to put anything in there. This will be like our publications, of which we have several already. And then we will also be purchasing books that we think are great books for adolescents, ages 13 to 18.
That's great, because sometimes little free libraries can be kind of hit or miss.
Right. No, we're going to monitor it, and we're going to register it with Little Free Library. We're going to monitor it. We're going to make sure that it is filled with just great books.
That's super cool. I love it. We'll have links to all of that stuff in the show notes, so you don't even have to bother your little heads with trying to go all the way to some other thing and remember addresses or all of that hard stuff. You can just click on a nice, easy link, and it'll be super easy.
Right.
All right. Karen, thank you so much. This was so delightful, and I super want to talk to you more about so many things. and I hope we can do that again sometime. But you're off to go do an episode of your own podcast.
Right.
Now.
Yeah, we have Owl's Nest, the podcast, which is our Owl's Nest Publishers podcast, where we talk all things publishing and books and writing for the adolescent imagination.
Okay, super. What are you going to be talking about on this episode that you're about to record?
The episode we're about to record is going to be about when you have adolescents who want to write and desperately want to publish right now. What do you do?
Oh, wow. Okay. That sounds super interesting. Okay, super. Well, have fun with that, and thanks again for coming on. And if you want to, quick housekeeping. I almost forgot. I'm just going to mention again real quick, we do have a Patreon up for the show now. The first 4 people who subscribe to the Patreon will be invited to a mini D&D session that I will run and that we will publish on the podcast feed as a real play episode. And there's also a puzzle sort of encoded in the Patreon page, and if you are able to discern what is being referenced on the Patreon page, you will gain the benefits of the 3rd tier Patreon without having to actually even support. But that's patreon.com/2geeksoup. You can also reach me on Twitter or Instagram at 2geeksoup and email me. If you have good news that you would like for me to share on the show, please email me at 2geeksoup@gmail.com. And even though it probably makes me the aging hippie art teacher, this podcast is a proud member of the More Than One Lesson faculty.